nights. Coffee houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light.
All right, folks, and welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I am one half, Rich Baris, People's Pundit. We'll be joined shortly by Robert Barnes, and we'll get his take on what's going on here. All right, look, so we're going to go over Israel's new coalition government, which was formed by Naftali Bennett after Netanyahu, who really won the most seats, failed to form a government after months and months of negotiations. And we'll give you the whole story of how to understand what's going on and why so many people, Robert sent me a great column, I tweeted it, and she's dead on. All right, Catherine is dead on. So we'll go over that. All right, we're also going to talk about the Supreme Court decisions. We're going to talk about some more polling results. We didn't get Robert's take on polling results last week because he was traveling. So we're going to get them this week. We'll talk about more censorship. You know how it goes, all right? Let me start, though, with Israel, because when Robert comes on, at least by that time, we'll have given background. Oh, and the FBI's role, apparently, the becoming increasingly clear role that they played in January 6th. But more than that, the media's reaction to it. All right? Look, years ago, I remember, and I don't want to date myself here before I get into Israel, on this issue specifically. All right? I remember when I was in college, you would never have been able to convince me that decades later, or whatever it's been, that liberals would be apologists for the national security and federal law enforcement state. Now, They don't care about local law enforcement, and in fact would love to federalize them. They don't support the blue, they don't back the blue, but they do back the FBI. They do back the CIA. They do back the brass, the never-ending war military brass. All right, and help you understand that a little bit. And this will actually piggyback off of what happened in Netanyahu. But to understand that a little bit, people always ask me, I don't understand how this could be. And look, I get it. You know, when I was in college, that was never going to happen. They opposed the Patriot Act. They opposed FISA, period. End of story. They didn't trust the CIA. They didn't trust the FBI. Hoover's FBI was like the worst thing to possibly happen to the Federal Bureau. I mean, well, he is a federal bureau, but it was the worst possible thing that you could do. All right? So people ask me all the time, well, why is the FBI why are they so loyal to the feds? And I really got to tell you, this is a modern creation. This was not like this before. And in a second, I'll bring in Robert here because he's here. He's joined us. But this is because of the era of Donald Trump. First, Barack Obama paved the way for it by basically using the levers of government to persecute his political enemies. He made that okay. All right. And then, generally speaking, when the Democrats were wiped out in 2016, the media and the national security state played the role of opposition. So they worshiped them. They began to worship Robert Mueller, a man they wanted tried at The Hague. All right. I mean, you know what? Let me just bring in Robert. And that is because they were the what's the word I'm looking for, Robert? The bulwark. You know, the last stand against Donald Trump. They were going to fix everything that went wrong in November of 2016. They were going to fix it all. So they became water-carrying boys and girls for the national security state and the Washington. And then the second aspect to this, and I would urge people to go listen to Glenn Greenwald's last interview with Tucker because he nailed it. If you don't work in this industry, you don't understand the major problem here. These national security actors leave their post as the head of the CIA, leave their post at DNI, leave their post at the feds. Look at Andy, excuse me, I'm forgetting his name, but look at Jim Comey and look at Andy. These people, and even now Peter Strzok, these people should be probably charged with crimes, and instead they get some kind of contributor role, some paying contributor role for CNN and MSNBC and NBC in general. And they write columns in the Washington Times and Jim Comey in the New York Times. I mean, the Washington Post and the New York Times. Jim Comey used the New York Times. They played a role in getting the special counsel. I mean, so people have to understand how did this, because I get asked this all the time, Robert, how the hell did this happen? How did liberals become the deep state sycophant, right? This is how, because it was orange man bad. They threw everything they supposedly stood for out the window, and that's it. Now, this is the problem with some of you lefties who think your party's coming back. It's not coming back. Not without a radical destruction of the party as it exists right now. Because once these people, and you don't know these people, once they get their hooks in you, you're done. And you need a party purge like the Republicans have been trying to do of their party for years now. Because once you get the hooks and the John McCains and the Lindsey Grahams, they are at their beck and call. And they won't challenge them. They have to be replaced and removed. Total top-down reconstruction, man. Or ground up, really. Whoops, I'm over here whacking things. Ground up reconstruction. I mean, what do you got to add to that, Robert? I mean, that is what happened here. That's how this transformation happened.
Well, in terms of the FBI, they were born a political body. I mean, there was no more politically oriented manipulator than J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, yeah.
And it was always a giveaway that both Comey and Mueller often praised J. Edgar Hoover. So but sort of from an ideological perspective, it went from being, all it is the political establishment as I see it, has changed. So the political establishment is still in control, but its ideology has shifted from being sort of still corporatist, still a globalist in the way it was from the very inception of sort of the deep state in the post-World War II era. You could argue began really in the post-World War I era, seeds of it even before that in the 1890s and 1900s. But its politics shifted from a kind of economic conservatism of a type. It was corporatism, but still it was more domestically oriented. That shifted after in the 1970s. And Kevin Phillips does a great job of detailing all this. The long history is that when you have an investment class start to dominate, they shift from domestic production to where they can make more profit internationally. And that began to happen in the 1970s. Christopher Lasch really documented it well in the 1990s, called Revolt of the Elites. And so that their political orientation, the same group of people was still running things. The same politicization was still present. But the difference is their politics shifted from sort of a more nationalistic hue to, and a Cold War dominated mindset to a neoliberal globalist mindset. And that's what made Trump so offensive. Trump was a challenging sort of the neoliberal global order. It's what would unite, why do the same group of people hate, say, Hugo Chavez, the Haitian Revolution, some of the recent left populists in Latin America, and Donald Trump? That may seem contradictory, because their only ideology is a certain idolatry of a sort of neoliberal globalist elite being in control and having power. And the other part of it is the professional class takeover of our institutions. The professional class as a class has always was kind of a neoliberal class, but they become even more so. And so as they have expanded their influence, I mean, you look at a lot of these people. Why do we have so many lawyers running the FBI, for example? I mean, these are not career FBI agents. These are people that parachute in from the top. And that's a key part of the problem, and who gets rewarded and who gets punished within the system. And so all of that has distorted objectives and incentives. So to a certain degree, their role in January 6th, whatever it may be, is a continuation of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO type programs, but it just has a different ideological hue, because conservatives were under the naive belief that the G-men myth of the 50s were true today, or even frankly true then.
And were even true then, right, Robert? I mean, right.
They just, they helped to just assassinate Fred Hampton. And when did that happen? It happened a month after the FBI informant reported that Hampton was trying to create a coalition, and had succeeded in creating a coalition with the prominent Appalachian poor white representation in Chicago, because there was big population there, both Chicago and Detroit, from the World War II era, and the Black Panthers as to citywide economic reforms. And Hoover was paranoid about a coalition of that type being formed. And so not long thereafter, Fred Hampton was shot and murdered. They claimed it was self-defense, the police did, but the problem was there were a bunch of bullets going in and not very many coming out. In fact, it turned out I think they only found one that even possibly came out. But so that was sort of that's who we're dealing with is that group. They're a group that down deep, they're the Hamptons crowd kind of folks. They're people who don't agree with America. You see it, James Comey. James Comey, just watch and listen to Comey or Andrew McCabe, and you can see what their politics are, how overt and open it is, how blatant it is, how political it is, how opposed to America it is at a core level, and particularly Trumpism and anything associated with it. And ask yourself, would these people do something bad to help facilitate something like January 6th? Well, there's almost no doubt.
That's it, Robert. That's what I want to get at here. So the media's reaction to this is like, how dare you insinuate the FBI wouldn't behave as it has behaved for 70 years? Like, what the hell are these people talking about? This is what they do. It's just, it was, I'm in the boat with what you said before. Really, this was always a myth. And I've known, look, and I don't want to insult anybody. I know, I know a lot of rank and file people. So it's just at a point now where, this excuse, don't put us all in this basket. There's so many of us who oppose. At a certain point, a couple years ago, I just told them, well, then, you know what? At this point, you're culpable too for your silence. So your silence is culpability. So if you're so virtuous and you're so moral and there's this righteous indignation all the way down the ladder, then where's the revolt, man? Because what you care more about yourself than you do about fixing the image of your institution, fixing the faith the public has lost in your institution. And it's not going to come back. It's not. We do the trust in institutions. there is a solid 35 to 40% in this country now who loathe the FBI. And then another, 10 to 15%, maybe 20% that really just distrust them because, they have a skeptical view of them. And generally speaking, the media is trying to tell us we have to forget about all of their actions that they have done in the past. And it's just more clear now with the advent of like freer exchange of information until censorship came along. But it's just clearer now to us what they do, Robert. That's all. Right? So are they preventing crimes or are they entrapping people? Right? Are they kind of like nudging people into committing crimes so that they can entrap them and then say, look at what we did here? One of the biggest statistics that blew me away was Rand Paul years ago just flatly going to the floor and saying, the FBI hasn't stopped a single attack using these programs. Not a single thing. So all of these powers we gave them to stop all this in the next 9/11, they haven't done a damn thing, Rob. That's the truth.
Instead, every post 9/11 so-called terror case has been a Fed-led case.
A nudge.
That's usually been an entrapment-oriented case with dimwit. I mean, people that you look at and you're like, that was never a terror cell. That the Feds created a terror cell. Is what they did.
A lone wolf.
In order to justify and warrant their behavior and their conduct. So if people, I mean, there were some, there have always been some good actors within the FBI. It's just they're probably at the weakest point they've been since Hoover's death. I mean, they were never strong while Hoover was around, and they were in hiding while Hoover was around. But once Hoover was out, there was an opportunity for that for about a decade or so, and then it got right back to sort of complete politicized corruption. Particularly when Mueller took over in 2001 is when it really started to ratchet. People are forgetting that Mueller was doing instructions about not naming things Islamic terrorism, that, worried about quote-unquote Islamophobia, all this jazz. It's funny if you know anything about Mueller that he was playing this game, but
he vetted Anwar al-Awlaki for Bush. His FBI vetted the people to reach out to have this we can't isolate the Muslim community in America. Let's invite people to the White House. Let's bring them down to the State Department. He vetted Anwar al-Awlaki, folks.
Yes. And it was a bunch of elite level, Ames and Aldrich Ames and others. They're almost all elite level people that were the true traitors. And it's just because it was how those institutions were built. They were built of the elite, by the elite, for the elite, particularly at political, higher-ranking positions of power. And, I mean, just imagine Andrew McCabe was, for a period of time, director of the FBI while Trump was president. I mean, just listen to that guy. I mean, that guy is pretending that he's like, oh, we still don't know the motivation of the shooter that shot Congressman Scalise and tried to assassinate Rand Paul. We have no idea. We just can't figure it out. Even though he left a long list of explanations as to why he did it.
Yeah, they scrubbed his Facebook page. We got them. We put them on PP Day. He was very clearly duped by the Russia collusion hoax. He thought flatly Donald Trump was a traitor who was an asset of Vladimir Putin. Republicans were his enablers, which is what he called them on his Facebook page, and those enablers had to pay. And then he believed, too, he really did believe Elizabeth Warren, that if Republicans got Obamacare, even the skinny, repealed, that millions of Americans were going to die. So when you fill a nutcase's head with this stuff, Robert, he thinks he's like a hero who's going out, I got to go kill Steve Scalise. Who's in charge of whipping up votes? I got to go kill Steve Scalise. I mean, this is crazy, but this is what they did this. They did this because had they not pushed the intel community, the very people we're talking about right now, they are responsible for the shooting of Steve Scalise. Of course, I believe in personal responsibility. I do. But had they not turned the dark arts on their own domestic population and twisted the minds of these people and then had the Rachel Maddows of the world screaming it into their ear for an hour every night, that would not have happened. Maybe you would have found some other reason to go loco. But it would not have been directed at them for whatever reason because we have the screenshots, man. Be very clear. It's very clear. And this reaction from these sycophants now, right? You're a lawyer, you do it. But this idea that somehow they can't release the footage, they can't, there can't be a confidential informant who is also a unindicted co-conspirator. What the hell are these people talking about? And by the way, there are your very typical Republican apologists for the FBI and other intelligence agencies, Fed law enforcements, they're doing it too. So it's not just the left-wing media.
Well, you see how bad the gaslighting is when the Washington Post puts out a clearly fake article today, and it's the same old Russiagator crowds pushing it. Say it's Seth Abramson, that guy's just a total phony, a fraud, a crook, a grifter. That guy's just lies repeatedly. He did throughout Russiagate, became infamous for his 3,000 tweets,
book on fake
tweets and all that gibberish. And he's out there like he's got the super secret inside information, and he's just lying to his audience. Because in particular, they're trying to blame Roger Stone and especially Alex Jones. The problem is, this is why they don't want to release the 14,000 hours of footage they do have. Alex Jones was smart to record himself on tape trying to stop January 6th from happening in the way that it took place. Trying to stop the riots, trying to stop people from going inside, was telling them it was a staged event and it was the wrong thing to do. He put his own political and personal. He was the highest profile person on scene trying to stop it from happening by far. Was going around speaking, using his bullhorn to any and every group he could to stop and prevent it once he got down there and saw what was happening. Went up to Capitol Police, volunteered to try to go in and get people out, try to broadcast it more. And they're trying to pretend he was secretly behind the whole thing. What a dumb liar Seth Abramson is.
Isn't he out there with a bullhorn?
Everybody knows you're lying. If all the bad stuff about Alex Jones is true, why do they have to just lie and lie and lie and lie and lie about it? This includes Matt Taibbi, who's lied about him in the past. So, these are people that they can't help themselves. They want to build. They're rebuilding. Like, Trump's going to go to prison too because of January 6th and Roger Stone. There was some on Viva show last night with Viva, the Sunday night show, Law for the People.
And happy Father's Day, by the way. I forgot to wish you that.
Oh, yeah, and happy Father's Day to you. That was telling me that I was going to prison soon. That, we all know about your involvement in January 6th. This is the delusional fantasy Russiagate ×2 all over again. Same actors, same bad actors trying to excuse government complicity and government corruption. Same bad actors trying to pretend that do you remember that they tried to pretend Alex Jones was a secret Russian agent? He was taking money from the Ruskies. Ludicrous nonsense. Nobody did more. And the other thing they're doing, the media is doing a lot of, is they're confusing people between the rally on January 6th and the riots on January 6th.
Yeah, they're obfuscators. They're good at that.
Exactly. They keep saying, we found money. Alex Jones was organizing event, the January 6th event. Not telling you it's the event that was the speech that had nothing to do with the riots. That he tried to stop the riots when he found out they were occurring. The riots began while the speech was still going on.
If memory serves,
there's no connection between the speech and the riots. 99% of the people were not even part of the same groups. So that the media is just lying and gaslighting everybody about what taking place. And it's interesting. A week after Darren Beatty with Revolver News publishes the story pointing out the very unusual number of big unindicted of criminally culpable individuals, according to the government, who are neither being indicted nor identified, such that Tucker Carlson picks up on it, which is what really enraged the establishment.
Yeah, it did.
Was Tucker Carlson giving voice to this, pointing out the long history of it. Almost every post 9/11 terrorism case was a government fabricated crime. Almost every one of them, 95% of them, when they studied a government asset was the source of the idea. At some point, it's no longer, you're not intercepting or interfering or getting involved with
exposing.
A terror cell when you're the one coming up with the idea and creating the terror cell, which is what the feds were doing throughout post 9/11. In all of that time, Zero Dark 30, folks, is a completely fictitious movie. That isn't how they read Seymour Hersh on this. That isn't how they found at least the CIA part, not necessarily the SEAL part, but the CIA part. The CIA didn't find him through torture. CIA didn't find him at all. A Pakistani informant gave him up in exchange for a bunch of money. And what they were supposed to do was take him to a cave and say they found him and killed him there. But Obama's people were so arrogant and wanted so much praise that they had him whacked on site and wanted to brag about it because they were worried about Robert Gates, to the great embarrassment of the Pakistanis. That's why the Pakistanis had to come up with a crazy cover story that was, well, you know, none of our satellites were working that night, so we didn't see the airplane come right into where our own generals live. We didn't see the helicopter. Well, of course they did. The whole point was you weren't supposed to tell anybody. That's where you whacked them. You're supposed to be your genius. You found him in a cave. But Obama was so paranoid that Robert Gates would spill the beans or question him that he wanted all the fame. So that's why they did it the way they did it, to the great embarrassment of the Pakistanis. I mean, he burnt a bunch of bridges that night. Classic Obama. Ego first, everybody else second.
He is a bridge burner. He is a bridge burner.
Oh, terrible bridge burner.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, maybe Biden may be trying to actually fix some things we'll see.
He had a different style. Robert always did. Biden?
He did.
And
while Biden was always on the establishment and public agenda for wars, behind the scenes, at least the stories were, he's more cautious than he is anything. He's kind of like Bibi in Israel, that for all the talk of being real tough guy, often they are very cautious by persona. And that may be what Biden is doing. It does look like he's trying to actually get us out of Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. And it's funny, he may end up implementing a lot of Trump's vision in large parts of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, he just is a different way of going about it. Where Donald Trump would just say, listen, I'm the damn president, and I told people I was going to remove these troops. You're going to remove them. And then that would cause, because I'll tell you that 2018, in the spring of 2018, that meeting in the Situation Room was, that was when the intelligence community tried to just basically sign his political death warrant. Once he told them, oh no, I'm not just stopping with Syria. I mean, I wanted that plan with Syria yesterday, because today you should have been working on Afghanistan. And I mean, Mattis and McMaster, they just had a complete fit and ran to CNN and, told everybody at CNN, he's losing his mind. He's going to collapse the world. I mean, you know the drill, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen all the stories over the last week. There's going to be a bunch of these. Oh, God, Afghanistan is falling apart now that U.S. soldiers aren't there anymore. What that really should tell you is, if it will fall apart that quickly, why were we there for 20 years?
In the first place. Right.
What were we doing for the last 20 years that was supposedly making the country safe? So obviously, we did nothing. We achieved nothing except lose American lives for nothing.
And compound the exported heroin before the invasion was 180 metric tons a year. That's it. And which I know sounds like a lot, but now it's thousands. In 17, it was 9,000. It fell in the 18 opium report to like 7, roughly 7. So, big deal. So it's going to hover there. When we were there over 2 decades, the amount of opium that left that country is ridiculous. There were no rice and wheat fields and this and that. You could anyone who owns any land in Afghanistan is trying to grow Popov or somniferant. All right, I mean that's the only thing they can get money for.
It's an old game. I mean, you go back to the opium wars of China, where we forced their population to become addicted to opium, and we waged war to make sure we could keep doing it. I mean, that was not the U.S., but the West. That's what the British did. That's why they're literally called the Opium Wars.
They're called the Opium Wars.
Hong Kong only exists because, as part of the compromise, they had to give this little unoccupied island to the King of the Smugglers. And the King of the Smugglers developed, and to this day, I mean, one of the biggest companies in Hong Kong traces back from big drug dealers, opium drug dealers of the 1800s, the Scottish immigrant who helped found it. I mean, it's fast. I mean, the amount of history Americans have, and the West in general, I mean, those were Brits, have memory hold is really impressive at times. But and when we're seeing it in the January 6th context, and it's clearly politicized cases. And I mean, what they're really trying to say is, if anybody did anything bad, they did so because they were motivated to do so as part of a conspiratorial objective. And who's part of the conspiracy? All 75 million Americans that voted for Trump.
Right.
That's where they're really going.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
The leaders, that for them to go at Alex Jones and pretend, I mean, that's the most insane one, because Jones was the guy who was the number one person who actually took proactive action to stop it from happening, and you're pretending he was behind it.
Because they're trying to make that jump.
That requires a degree of cognitive dissonance that's off the charts.
They're trying to make that jump, Robert, from riot to any protest, any government, any
pro-Trump
right-wing,
support,
pro-Trump.
any lockdown policy.
Yeah, they're trying to make that leap. I think that's very clear. And if memory serves me correctly, because I wasn't there, and for the record, here's my testimony on Robert right now for those trolls. Robert was publicly, but also privately, like, this is a dumb mistake. They're walking right into a trap. He thought this was the dumbest thing off the jump. But wasn't Alex Jones out there with like a bullhorn? Like, stop! This is what they want you to do, right?
That's all was happening. He was rounding people up to get out, demanding that they get out, saying it was the wrong thing to do. In fact, on the way there, before he knew it was happening, he was hammering people, don't behave like Antifa, be peaceful. Our permit is behind the Capitol on this other side, only go there. He was hammering this all the way down because he was worried about somebody trying to do something stupid. He gets down there, sees people are doing something stupid, gets up on a car, gets his bullhorn and says, get out, get out, get out. Anyone else who's thinking about going in, don't go in. He saved a bunch of people who would have ended up probably going to jail, didn't know what was going on, just wandering in there. He was the one saying, pull out, get out, don't go in. And then he sent his people around to Capitol Police saying, what can I do to help? If you want me to go in there and get people out, I will do anything you need for me to help get these people out of here. And of course, Jones is smart. Jones recorded all of it. So that Jones has that tape. So that's tape they can't hide, like they're hiding the other 14,000 hours of tape they're hiding right now. I was talking to a Hollywood screenwriter who said, watch, there's going to be selective editing tapes coming out. Just
without a doubt.
10 minutes to 20 minutes, and it's going to be pieced together here, partially there, because they're running this like a movie. That's what they're trying to do, a movie with a fake narrative. But nothing says gaslighting more than the Washington Post trying to cover up for Fed involvement being exposed last week by shifting blame to Roger Stone and Alex Jones, particularly Jones. Stone wasn't there and participating in any of it either. But Jones was fiercely opposed to it and had been warning people for the weeks leading up to it. Don't let this happen. Don't have this happen. Don't do this. That's why he was the one attacking QAnon for months leading up to it. It's saying QAnon was a fake staged movement that was meant to entrap people. So the trying to blame him is in the delusional fantasies of these frauds and phonies and fakes like Seth Abramson, who claims to be a lawyer. He's got to be the dumbest lawyer on the planet. He should be disbarred for his tweets because he's just too stupid to be representing anyone. His former client should be filing habeas petitions and ineffective assistance of counsel claims and just citing his own tweets as examples of how dumb this guy is. He could not have provided competent, capable counsel for them. But it's when you see the same Russiagator crowd pushing this, and then you see the same FBI. Andrew McCarthy, for people who don't know, he was the guy he's Fox's favorite guy. He's the National Review's favorite guy. He, throughout almost all of 2015 and 2016, convinced Rush Limbaugh that James Comey was one of the great, most ethical, moral, decent, good men, and he knew him personally and professionally, and he was going to indict Hillary Clinton.
Bob Mueller, too. Bob Mueller is a decent man. I've
known Bob Mueller
for years.
Robert Mueller. What a great man. What a good leader. And I was one of the ones saying there's no way they're going to indict Hillary if they don't indict her by fall, because there's no way they're indicting her during the middle of a Democratic national campaign, and definitely not if she gets nominated.
Yeah, no chance.
Then he came back around, initially was dismissive of aspects of Russiagate, came around to recognizing how bad things were doing. But how did he respond? He said, don't worry, Durham and Barr are going to clean this up. Yep. The indictments are coming. You can still find the Fox News headlines. Andy McCarthy, indictments coming. Durham, indictments coming. Well, where are they, Andy? And then we get to fall. He's one of the people pushing for Amy Coney Barrett. Barrett was going to be this great conservative jurist fighting for being with Trump on elections and Obamacare and all these other big things, and attacking people like me, his crowd, his constituency. Of course, we now have seen not only was she the decisive vote that killed the election of cases going up to the Supreme Court, but she killed him before the election, killed him after the election, not once but twice. But now, who is one of the decisive votes to save Obamacare? Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah, I know.
Think about all the crap Trump took on Obamacare because of her history of lying and gaslighting to people, how she was really going to take on Obamacare if she could just get on that Supreme Court. She had Justice Roberts tattooed on her, and now you have leading legal commentators across the country saying we now have a 3-3-3 split on the U.S. Supreme Court. We have Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, who are going to be with each other 90% of the time as constitutional conservatives. We have the 3 liberals, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. And then we got the 3 Justice Roberts types, including 2 that Trump put on
that court.
Now, Kavanaugh, I don't blame him for, because Kennedy said he was not going to retire unless Kavanaugh was picked. But for all those conservatives that went to such bat to save Kavanaugh, I mean, I wonder how they feel now. How much they thought, oh, he'll be our hero once he gets on the court. There's a reason Kennedy picked him, folks. But I don't blame Trump for that, because that was either wait for Kennedy to retire, maybe when a Democrat is president, or pick whoever Kennedy tells him to.
Even Kennedy went farther on Obamacare, Robert, though. He went further on Obamacare. Yes. This is what you really, I mean, not to throw out names here, but I'm thinking, I don't know, Ben Shapiro. I'm thinking others like this. Isn't it funny how mad they get when they punt? Or, or really, because that's what they're doing. Yep. They're punting or rewriting because they don't want to have to, they don't want to have to take down this law at all. I think it's very clear as an institution, Roberts wanted to preserve this law. So they're mad as hell when it happens to them. But what was it? Not even 6 months ago, where they were arguing that it's perfectly fine for them to punt on election integrity issues, on all of these lawsuits. So, look, I mean, in the end, that's why, because these people have been around a while. That's why Donald Trump came, because they were failing at every corner, they were failing at everything, at trying to stop the march of progressivism. So eventually the Republican base said, you know what, I'm going a totally different route here, because I can't, these people fail us at every turn. I am not going to repeat the Mitt Romney mistake again. You don't like it? That's tough. You can vote for Hillary Clinton. And that was, I mean, honestly, a real act of independence the Republican base made in 2016. Across the pond here, Robert.
Yeah.
I don't think this government's going to last very long across the pond. I got to be honest with you. Now,
you mean the UK?
Now that Netanyahu failed to make a coalition and Naftali Bennett sided with the radical.
That Newsweek piece was really a good breakdown. I mean, I think there's a couple of things that stand out about this new Israeli coalition. It's not a sustainable coalition for very long at all.
No way.
It was partially it's Netanyahu's fault, because he cut off a lot of people's ambitions to promote himself, sort of like the way the Clintons did in the States. And so consequently, he had some people that had real personal animosity that are otherwise ideologically allied to Netanyahu's positions, that just wanted him to be knifed just to have him knifed. And he didn't have a ready protege to replace him.
Yeah.
And those were probably 2 mistakes. But that's because neither of one of those is very common.
Are they capable, Robert? This is the problem. This was driven.
It's not a manageable coalition.
But Naftali Bennett too, but lesser extent. But really, what's his name? I'm going to butcher his last name. Gideon Sayer, right? That was personal. Very personal that he betrayed Netanyahu.
It was not political at all.
No, there was nothing political about this. He personally felt, like Robert said, he felt slighted. He thought he would be the next Netanyahu. I mean, let's be real. But isn't Netanyahu right to kind of cast these guys to the side, because they're not competent people? Let's be real for a second.
Yeah,
these are not competent people. I don't think that
was a mistake. I think the mistake was not finding someone who could be competent that he really brought up as a protege. He never really did that, and so he left a vacuum in Israel post Netanyahu, and I think he thought he'd be there another decade or so, and he might come back. I mean, the case is falling apart.
He's the most popular politician in the country by far. There is nobody who rivals his popularity,
and especially if he survives the corruption allegations, then he'll really be restored, probably in public opinion. I mean, the big problem with the coalition is a simple one, and it's the core problem for Israel. Period, politically.
Yeah.
That here you have the 2 Arab parties. They believe, go back and watch Netanyahu in the 1970s when there was an American-style trial debate done in a trial format where a young Netanyahu was a witness on the stand. And he believed, and this was a common Israeli belief at the time, that if you gave, and it's still a belief of certain Arabists and other groups, that if you gave the Palestinian Arabs education and healthcare and employment and citizenship, that they would reciprocate by recognizing that a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-party democracy is the way to go. There were others that said, no, it was the Jewish settlers who brought a lot of economic opportunity to Palestine in the first place between 1890 and 1950. And their reward for it was constant attempts by the local Arab population that they had helped enrich to try to mass kill them over and over again. So I mean, it's just, sorry, but it was never gonna. History says any naivete about the Palestinian Arabs is just that. But there's no better example of that than you have two Arab parties representing 20% of the Israeli citizenship that are Arab. The biggest minority religious representation, to my knowledge, compared to any Islamic country anywhere in the world. You find another Islamic country where there's 20% Jewish or 20% Christian.
Well, Lebanon had Christians, and they. Well,
yeah,
we know that story.
Tried to kill them all with the Armenian genocide, and then the Arab regimes kicked everybody out when that they could in the 1950s. So, and what do these two parties believe in? Both of them refuse to recognize the right of Israel to even exist. Right. One of them is an open Islamist party. Now that's who, and that's the reason why they refuse to be part of the government at all until this one, because they hate Netanyahu enough that they're willing to be part. But that's a totally unsustainable coalition. And this is why, like, people say, "Oh, Israel will never lose, so we don't have to get involved with Israel." The goal right now of the whole anti-Israeli coalition is for the Palestinian Arabs to become a majority voting bloc in Israel.
That's absolutely
They don't have to take out Israel. They could just become the majority, and now they have nuclear weapons. And we don't have to doubt what they would believe, because even the Arab parties in Israel are Islamist, quasi-fascist, who don't recognize Israel's right to exist.
So you want me to read some of this man's quotes?
Along the lines of giving, you can keep, the more you give Arabs, the more they see you as weak and pitiful. There's a reason why for 4 years, there was almost no new violence in the Mideast, and particularly actually very low simmer in Israel while Trump was president. It's because they knew, man, that MFer will just bomb your ass if he feels like it. I mean, and Trump did that deliberately. Trump's like, hey, look at you, boom, bombed you. That's just, that's the tough guy, because he knows that's what Arabs respect. They don't. You're going to give us democracy, you wuss. That's what they think about that, and we have proof of it by the Arab parties in Israel. That's why it's a politically unsustainable. The only thing they can go back to is a right-leaning coalition. Now, the other thing, though, is that I think all these sort of naive types and within the Biden administration who thought, oh, Netanyahu's the big problem.
They're going to find out, Robert. They're going to find out.
Early on, this was Clinton's thesis in the mid-'90s, when 96, when Netanyahu won and served terms for 3 years. It was all Netanyahu's fault. They're about to find out. Israel's going to be twice as aggressive with Netanyahu out, because these people want to show that they're even tougher than Netanyahu, number one. Number two, Netanyahu was always cautious. The best realpolitik foreign policy show out there is a show called The Duran, which they have a locals page, which has all their stuff, or you can, so the duran.locals.com, or you can look them up on YouTube. I did a thing with them last week that's already coming true in spades about what was really going on at the summit. And we can bridge into that in a little bit. But they're one of the first people to point out that whatever you think of Netanyahu, and they give like CIA analyst type analysis, or what an honest CIA would look like, what a real life Jack Ryan would look like. It's not ideologically tinted. It's just, here's the political reality here, here's the political reality here.
Yeah.
And they predicted all this with Israel. They said, whatever you think of Netanyahu, he's actually fundamentally cautious by nature. He's a big talker, and he'll take very selective strategic action when he thinks necessary, but he does not create unnecessary conflict.
Look at his brother's history. Look at the history with his brother, Robert. The man knows the realities of war. Yeah, he's a big talker because he is a realist. Netanyahu is a realist.
And he understands that's what the Arab world respects.
They need that.
They tend to be less violent when they think you're a tough SOB. It's an old lesson an old family man, let's say, taught me when I was younger, who said, Bobby, never mess with anyone who has a higher threshold of pain than you do. That is some very useful insight.
That's great.
And that's the Arab mindset. They don't mess around with people who they think will go twice as hard as they go.
Yeah.
And that's why Trump got the most peace in the Middle East we'd had in 50 years in terms of no new conflicts, no expansion of conflicts, and mostly a deceleration of existing conflicts, and the first major peace accords in 20 years. It's not a coincidence that that's why he bragged about he gave I don't know if he gave that dog a medal or not, but gave the dog a medal who helped was involved in that. I think was that the not the Al Qaeda guy, but the ISIS guy that got whacked. I forget the whole backstory, but that was Trump. I mean, he whacked that guy, then he turned around and whacked Soleimani. Yep. Now backstory is he might not have known Soleimani was in the car, but that just made the story more legendary in the Arab world about Trump. Yeah. That guy just bombed a random car.
Like you may just get killed because, right. So you may just get killed because he decided you needed to be spanked for a second, right? So
he just was playing with drones one night. He got bored with CNN. He's like, boom, boom, boom. That was and Trump deliberately nurtured that mindset while behind the scenes negotiating peace and decelerating conflicts.
Yeah.
Because he understands the Arab mindset. I mean, he's been dealing with the Arab world for 50 years in real estate and other transactions. So he understood them much better than anybody else understood.
Yeah, there's a great story, Robert, about Xi Jinping at the White House when he came to the White House and Trump bombed Syria. And over, he did that
deliberately. He made sure he's eating dinner with him.
Trump didn't really buy the.
How's the noodles?
More cake? Right. That's exactly what he did.
Classic Trump.
Classic Trump. And this is to give everybody the numbers. Netanyahu overwhelmingly, Likud won overwhelmingly the most seats. Understand there is now a prime minister who has a party who won 7 seats. That's it. The guy
10% who 10% of the vote. 10% of the vote.
That's the guy it. They were humiliated. In
coalition with a party that doesn't believe his country should exist.
I'm going to read some of these quotes in a second, right? Because
great Newsweek piece. Newsweek's putting together. I guess they're trying to recover from becoming non-existent in the public mind by having independent people write for him. But it's a good piece.
Catherine Glick, this is fantastic. Catherine really is. 7 seats for Bennett. Gideon Sayer won 6. That's it. And then you have Ram, I guess is how you say it, and that is Mansour Abbas, who is the leader, and for the first time ever, the governing coalition now is Arab nationalist faction, which does not believe, well, first, that's period, an Arab nationalist faction. But this one does not believe in Israel's right to exist, and the leader of the party, Mansour Abbas, who is a living, breathing proof that Israel is not what Ilhan Omar and everybody else say they are, because he was educated by them. He was nurtured by them. He hates the country who gave him his life. It's incredible.
Right? I mean, some of the best healthcare, arguably the best healthcare, the best education, and the best economic opportunity throughout the Middle East for Arabs is in Israel. That's the and their response is to say, and this is of the 20% that are citizens. Their answer is, we would like to abolish you as a nation.
Yep.
Which means they realize they can't beat Israel anymore. So that's where all this apartheid language is coming from. The goal is to force Israel to incorporate the Palestinian territories and give Israeli citizenship, which would then make Palestinians a majority of Israel. And so then they don't have to beat Israel. They then have the nuclear weapons in an Islamist state. And again, Hamas is an Islamo-fascist regime that thinks the PLO is too weak. I mean, that gives you an idea for the insanity.
And where they come from. Yeah, and here is just before Bennett and Sayer put their personal, I don't even know if it's ambition, because these two are on a suicide mission. Glick is right. These two are on a political suicide mission. But just before they put their personal feelings, their personal whatever, above party and their own beliefs, which apparently they don't have very strong convictions, Abbas, the man they make a deal with the devil, the man they shake their hands with, the day later stands up in the Knesset, stands at the podium, and in Arabic gives a speech, and in it he says, "We will restore the lands that were stolen from our people." So when Robert and I are telling you that their goal is a version of, I know the left gets triggered when I use this word and others use it, replacement. It is replacement. That is their goal. All right. And here you have,
and by the way, it never was their land. The Ottomans sold the land to Jewish settlers legally.
Right.
The UN promised the then League of Nations, later became the United Nations, promised them all of Palestine for a Jewish majority state, and then they gave almost 80% of it to Jordan. And then the rest of it was seized by Jordan and Egypt in the 1948 war, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This was not, and Israel has continued to recognize a lot of those land titles when they don't have to, because that's really not the land title. Really, a strong legal argument internationally that at least everything up to between the river and the sea, including the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, are Israeli lands by both international decree, by a wide range of international summits, by the history of Ottoman transfer title, all of it. The idea that this was stolen land is mythology. And the idea that they're all living there, also it's a flat lie. They just make up these stories.
They make them up.
Nobody lies more than the Palestinian Arab cause.
And this is straight out of the Muslim Brotherhood playbook here. Or not even. Absolutely. This is out of their vocabulary. You ready for this one? This was in 18. Since Israel's founding in 1948, the Palestinian people have lived in a continuous disaster, and this is how he refers to the IDF, that was created by Zionist terror gangs. Okay, this is how he speaks about the men and women in uniform who protect him from bombs that are coming from his apparently homeland, right? So, this goes on and on. There's a day, guys. It's basically where they celebrate Jewish history. There's a nationalist parade. Everybody is welcome, just so everybody knows. But a lot of blue and white flags getting waved, all right? And this is how he referred to it. All right, the flag parade in Jerusalem today is an unbridled provocation. Its main characteristic is hateful shouts and incitement. No, it's not, if you've ever seen one. Hateful shouts and incitement of violence in an effort to inflame the region for political purposes. So what he's saying here is a gathering of Jews celebrating that they have a home, okay, is a provocation to him and his people. Folks.
And it has been ever since they started showing up in the 1890s. Even though that land was mostly all desolate and abandoned, you can find old video footage from the 1900s. You can find descriptions by Mark Twain from the 1860s. Yeah. You can find description all the way back over a century, and almost 2 centuries now. And you'll find almost all this land was abandoned. Almost all this land was undeveloped. Twain talks about going through, and you could go 30 miles without seeing a single home anywhere because the Ottomans had abandoned it. And the people who you had absentee landlords that were part of Ottoman title who held it. You had some Bedouins in the south. You had a little bit of other development, but very little development. And they've been enraged at mere Jewish presence ever since there's been Jewish presence. And it's part of an Islamo-fascist ideology, by the way, that goes back to the late 19th century that was mostly focused on the West. This idea that if Israel didn't exist, suddenly the West would embrace, Islamo-fascist would embrace the West, misses that the Muslim Brotherhood was rooted in anti-British, anti-French, anti-Western, anti-American ideas. And so that's where the problem of this regime is. It's not politically sustainable, but it will be uber macho. So watch them be tougher on Gaza, be tougher on the West Bank, be tougher in negotiations or dealings with Hamas, be tougher. It would not surprise me. Watch that they need to prove the military foreign policy side of this completely untenable coalition needs to prove that they can be tougher and more effective than Netanyahu.
Yeah, because
which would be tough for them to pull off. But in order to do that, because people forget, before Netanyahu came in, the 2000s had been a horrendous disaster of domestic terrorism against the Israeli population.
Oh, it was horrible.
Discotheques, restaurants, cafes, bus stops, you name it.
Just the bus going down the road, Robert. Boom! Kids everywhere. I mean, people forget before the Iron Dome could stop a lot of these rockets coming through. If you're not old enough, then I strongly suggest that you educate yourself before you offer your uninformed opinion about how this all transpired over the years. And by the way, what did Abbas get for his 3 votes? Because that's the thing. This is why when Robert says it's untenable, he's not joking. I mean, this position is tenuous at best. If Abbas basically doesn't hold his coalition together for whatever policies they actually want to implement. See, this is the sad thing. The Israeli people are not going to get legislation that helps them at all because Abbas doesn't agree with Naftali Bennett domestic policy. So it's going to be gridlock of every time something happens that a boss doesn't like, he's going to threaten to withhold his votes. And that is enough to kill it. Guys, the confidence vote passed by a single vote. That has never happened before. A single vote. I mean, so this is and
that's also why they need foreign policy events to validate who they are.
That's right.
So I think the Biden administration foolishly believed pushing Netanyahu out would reduce the possibility of Israel hitting Iran. When in fact, Netanyahu always said he would not do so unless he got U.S. permission. That's why he was enraged at Obama. But he refused to attack Iran's nuclear capabilities unless the U.S. gave him a green light. This Israeli regime won't care.
Yeah.
They'll try, don't be surprised if in the next 30 days Israel takes out some Iranian nuclear capabilities, and not just like Mossad style, inside sabotage, actual air raid bombs. Because what this article details is there's no domestic policy coalition at all.
No,
there's nothing. The only place they have any kind of a meaningful authority of action, freedom of action, is foreign policy. So that means in order to try to extend their career, justify however brief their tenure is, validate them for future purposes, they've got to do something big on the foreign stage. And they're going to be much riskier than Netanyahu was. And whether that turned out to be a good idea or bad idea will be up in the air. But the people who thought what they were getting out of Israel was a less aggressive Israel are going to find it will be just the opposite under this regime.
You got to think they got to set something in the sky soon, Robert, because their popularity has to be abysmal. It has to be the weakest, least popular governing coalition and leadership we have probably ever seen. And folks, these guys both of them put themselves forward to the voters as prime minister candidates, and they were humiliated. 116, 15, or 17, 16, nothing. I mean, they were humiliated. Now, these are the guys who are running, and they're basically, when it comes to domestic policy, they are basically two very unpopular guys, with one being that, a prime minister head. The deal includes Sayar being prime minister in 2 years, so they're supposed to share it. But he's not going to make it that long if this is the way. I mean, I really can see this government falling apart. And then they're all going to be held hostage by a boss on domestic policy. Every time they do something he doesn't like, he's going to offer to withhold those 3 votes, I'm telling you. And basically, they had to give him the farm to even get on board for this coalition. It would Bedouin settlements. On settlements, though, Robert, they're going to be weak on settlements. So
I mean, that's the one thing that the Arabs will get. The Arabs will get some what policies that they want on settlements. That's that's the policy carrot they get.
That's why they were jumping in the streets. Absolutely. That is why they were in the streets. That issue alone is why they were in the streets celebrating, and the right, as Catherine put it, looked like they were on suicide watch, basically. I mean, but
I think it's going to be, I think there'll end up being more aggressive foreign policy, and it'll be short-lived domestically, because it's just not a manageable. Once the Palestinian Arabs and the Arab parties took the path they did after 2000, that there was no Israeli peace majority anymore in Israel. So even the center left is very skeptical of two-party state or peace solutions, because they've seen how the Arab parties behave. They saw how the PLO behaved. They've seen how Hamas behaves. Every time they extend any courtesy, they get smacked in the face back. So they understand the Arab mindset. So I think that part of what people are predicting is unlikely. And I think given the Iranians, really it's a hand-picked president. They have elections, but you kind of put them in quotation marks because they only allow certain people to run. But they pushed for a hardliner to come in, and there is no doubt that they're pushing the hardliner in order to get Biden to capitulate on getting us back into the Iranian deal on even more favorable terms maybe than was the case before. So that's going to accelerate. If Israel wants to do something, they're going to have to do something in the next window. Because I think that a very generous Iranian deal is probably forthcoming soon, very soon. I mean, there's been ongoing negotiations in Europe, and I think the Duran laid it out pretty quick. Laid it out that this is where the path was likely going, and
They were doing this behind Trump's back, the Kerrys, and they were already doing this. Is what people should understand, that they were doing this in Europe behind Donald Trump's back every chance they got to go shoulder to shoulder with somebody or rub elbows with somebody. John Kerry was running around telling everybody, don't worry, the intelligence community is going to get rid of this guy. He will never serve a second term. He flatly told an emissary to tell that to a boss in Palestine. So don't make a deal, because the Abraham Accords were coming, and he was like, don't worry, this is going to be just for show, and he's not going to make it anyway to a second term. It's really incredible what they prevented from it's incredible that Donald Trump got what he got in the circumstances that he had to deal with. It is.
And they're going to do this deal with Iran that without getting anything really from Iran. In other words, the Iranian is apparently still going to keep backing the Houthis in Yemen, or a vicious group, continue to back the various Shia militias in Iraq that effectively run Iraq, which have been the main reason for the civil war in Iraq over the last 20 years. Going to continue to back Hezbollah in Lebanon, and continue to back Shia militia movements as far away as Nigeria. So apparently that we're not going to require any change at all. And the one place we were really effectively squeezing Iran was economically. Part of it was that the revolution never delivered on its promises. Of course, no shock there. But their GDP was really, really struggling, and the regime was under more and more internal pressure. Because what people don't know is the Persians do not have a long history of religious militancy. The Persian culture was Persian Empire is one of the most religiously tolerant empires in world history.
Yeah, it was.
So
it was.
The Abbasid Caliphate was heavily influenced by the Persians, and the effect of that was a lot of much more religious tolerance and intellectual tolerance. That was really the peak of the various Arab caliphates, because of that Persian mindset that favored intellect and culture and tolerance. That is natural to a trading-oriented culture. Also, the Persians figured out early on they were better off if they let the local population do whatever they wanted religiously. It's sort of the birth or the recandescence of modern-day Judaism took place under the Persian Empire.
I was going to say, without Cyrus, Robert, who knows what would happen to the Jewish people? He's the one who freed them from Nebuchadnezzar.
Completely.
Exactly. That's history. That's not Bible.
Restored a lot of the best of the power of Judaism derived during the Persian Empire. So this is a foreign, and if you know Persians that live in like West LA, other places, religious militancy is kind of foreign to them at a certain level. So you have these conflicting impulses in Persian culture between the Shia religious structure that's very Catholic. For people who don't know the difference between Shia and Sunni, the best way to understand is it's Catholic versus Protestant version of Islam.
A good idea. It's a good way to put it.
The Shia believe in a sort of a hierarchical power structure, and their basis for that is a belief of a certain connection to certain descendants. But there's a tendency to focus on the descendant dispute when that's not the real dispute. It's that the way you access and legitimate power and understand God is through this hierarchical structure of these ayatollahs and imams. Whereas in Sunni tradition, they believe in direct relationship between you and Allah. Yeah. So it's the Protestant
version.
And once you understand that, then you understand why it's so intense, the dispute between the two. And you also understand how it can manifest itself very differently politically. You really couldn't quite have the same kind of Sunni dominant tradition that you have in Iran with the Shias, because there isn't the same degree of deference to a hierarchical structure in the Sunni tradition. But so that goes very, very deep. But really, the strategy to squeeze Iran was showing very promising signs, and removing the sanctions basically negates that. And the idea that they're not building waivers, they're not trying to build nuclear weapons is nuts. Of course they're trying to build nuclear weapons.
The exemption waivers, Donald Trump crushed them with basically Obama, and would give them these waivers to different nations, whether it's Germany, whatever it may be. They're sanctioned. The oil exports are sanctioned. You're not supposed to buy oil. Oh, but by the way, we're going to give you a waiver. It's called like a SAR waiver or something. I forgot the technical name for it. I think that may be it. But Trump came out, and I remember covering this. I remember editing the story. he basically said, I'm sorry, Europe, but you are not going to be getting this oil from them anymore. That's it. Because they're using this back door to fund all of the stuff we don't want them to fund. So it makes that's very Trumpian. Look, it's common sense. You don't have a sanction on paper and then let them basically get around it with all of this, catch-22s or whatnot. So he removed those exemptions. He crushed oil exports. That obviously is their main source of income. They were at the lowest levels ever in the history of this regime. And they had no, you take away money, you take away the power. It's not hard to figure out.
Yeah, because, they mostly built, what baffles people sometimes, a lot of Arab nationalists and even Islamists and Islamofascists are socialist to a certain degree on domestic economics. That they're definitely not entrepreneurial capitalists at all. And that's because people think of right-wing religion as not being associated with that. What they don't understand is socialism really has multiple manifestations. You can have communism, or the socialism can be race-based, like it was in Germany, which is, there's a reason Hitler called himself a socialist his whole life. He just meant something different by it than Marxist-style socialism. He had a socialism that was race-based and nationality-based rather than class-based. But it was no less a state control, a state dominance. Indeed, a lot of his war policies, there's a good YouTube channel that just goes through all of this. A lot of his war policies were necessitated by his idiotic socialistic economic policies. That he basically had to keep conquering new lands and new labor in order to supply and survive.
It's the bicycle theory. Yep. And once you stop pedaling, you're done. You fall over. You got to keep the momentum going. You have to.
And when Khomeini came in, the big pitch was, hey, we're going to nationalize oil. We're going to do what, Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela, though it was already nationalized in Venezuela. He was just going to control its redistribution. But the objective was we're going to nationalize it so it's redistributed back to the people and not just to British Petroleum or Standard Oil or anyone else. And he did nationalize it, but they created this big bureaucratic state because, again, they're Islamofascists. That means they're statist at heart. So they create these big, monstrous bureaucracies that pay off their protected class of people. A lot of the true believers in Iran are true believers because that's where their paycheck comes from the government job. Right. And so people who understood that about Iran knew a way to go at them was to take away that power of that paycheck because the rest of their economic policies had failed to deliver. They had not delivered mass redistribution of wealth. They basically just redistributed to a select class of a select religious group that were given nice, cushy government gigs. The ordinary working class person did not benefit in Iran in the way that was promised to them. And so that's their vulnerable point. That's their squeeze point. The Shah fell very quickly despite a very intense regime because of economics in 1979, a wide range of events that took place that year. So people know this is a way to flip Iran. Now, you might have, again, people can have different positions. People can say that's wrong. They don't like intervention. They don't like sanctions. They don't like it. I understand all that. So you can think whatever you think. But strategically, the real impact of this, of Biden re-entering the deal on even more favorable terms than before, is that Iran, the threat of Iran to the rest of the world and its Islamo-fascist regime will actually be back on its feet where it was on its knees and near dead.
And they'll command the loyalty of those people again. That's they'll beef that back up. That's what they'll do. It's the same reason why federal government workers are filled with liberals. That is who pays their bill. Take that job away. Let's see how long they stay liberal. There are just some people who do that because it benefits them. It's their personal situation. They're not particularly ideological.
Well, it's like some old tax protester clients have had that were like, all we got to do is get it in front of the judge. And I'm like, you think a federal judge is going to declare that the means by which he gets paid is illegal?
Is illegal?
What do you think the odds of that are? He's going to say, you know what? I shouldn't be receiving a check or a pension.
Zero. That's the what are the odds, as the show is titled? 0 on that one. I'll tell you. Speaking of which, I don't know how much you got to see of the results of the poll that we did, but it would be a good way to segue into Peru too. But let me show you. Let me get up Biden's approval rating. Get your thoughts on this. Biden absolutely fell this month, and he fell pretty good. And I have to say that I think the gas crisis was a big reason for that, Robert. I really do think that. I could show you his approval on cyber attacks. They were terrible. And I said last week, COVID, because we're polling in other districts and certain states, COVID as a top issue is now in single digits. So it's not the issue on everybody's minds. And his only really solid approval area is not even the economy, which he did better on this month, which is weird. But he was -2 or something in the prior survey. He ticked up a little bit. This, though, is his approval rating, the trend for his approval rating. So he's down now to 51%, and disapproval rose considerably. So he's still like +5. But that group of people who were like the somewhats and then that big undecided chunk, that went away. And I don't know how else to explain that, Robert, other than this, which let me see if I can pull this up. This is his approval on cyber attacks by region. You'd notice only the Northeast approves of this man. If you were to see the overall approval, it's because he's at like 60 in the Northeast. It's pushing up the rest. It's basically carrying him. Whereas by nation, this is cyber attacks, but even his general approval is really only strongly above water in the Northeast. The West is like tied. The Midwest, I think he's like -2. And in the South, he's like -8 or something. I'd have to go back and look, but that's generally where it is. But because he's so strong in the Northeast, it's like New York and Vermont and, Connecticut. He's so strong there, it's artificially pulling him up. It really is.
Yeah, I think he faces two major problems. One was just the ultimate fading of COVID, but that was supposed to be replaced by a booming economy, and there's not a booming economy.
Yep.
And so that's the problem, is that it's supposed to become, so like if you watch shows like what was The Rising, they're now gone. Crystal and Sager now have their own show, I think Breaking Points or whatnot. But one of Sager's major mistakes was a lot of times they act like controlled opposition, those two. In other words, their appeal is to their pitch is that they're independent, populist minded on the left and the right, and that the audience they're clearly trying to draw in are independent minded people that are looking for independent media. But here's what I mean by controlled opposition: the tendency for them to disproportionately gatekeep the narrative on big questions that really threaten institutional power. So, like when it came to COVID and the lockdowns, they were gatekeeping the narrative out of the gate. They've come around to, lab leak theories and others, but only after they were approved by the, Joe Rogans, Brett Weinsteins, or others.
Before the election, they defended the polls. I was on. They invited me on to be the devil's advocate, but they believed
after the election they pretended there was no Stop the Steal. That Stop the Steal was bad. So on big issues like election integrity, on big issues like what's happening with COVID and the vaccines and the lockdowns, on big issues like whether the polls are accurate in the first place leading up to the election, they tend to take, and a good controlled opposition will attract a group looking for independent information, but channel them back into core institutional narratives on the big questions, while you're being with the populist side on the smaller questions, that don't challenge or contest institutional power in a frightening way. And so one of his narratives that I disagreed with but it was clear what it's useful that I follow them because I get what the sort of media, narrative, political class narrative is, because that's whose opinion they really kind of are dealing with. And Sagar thought that the economy would be booming in summer. So I was like, okay, so this is what the Biden people think. The Biden people think COVID will lift him through the spring, and then the economy will boom, and that will lift him through the summer, and that will get his fall policies passed in the fall, and that will give them the boost they need to hold off the assault in 2022. But that is falling apart because COVID is collapsing even quicker than they thought it would as an issue, and there's more and more blowback on different sub-constituent components of it, and the economy's not booming. And that means his policies all look like they're dead in the water. I don't see a single major policy passing. There may be some. I heard this economist from the Washington Post was on this new Crystal Sagar show. And aside from just assuming that climate change was such an obvious big issue, like this guy's in the so-called, he looks like he's 15 years old, first of all. He's the economist for the reporter for the Washington Post. But the second part was he just assumed that clearly climate change is an issue. Everybody recognizes, like, we could reduce the temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees. What fantasy land are you living in? I mean, this guy's an idiot. And this is the kind of people they put on as important, serious. It's like taking advice from your bartender, taking advice from these two. I mean, yeah, I like my bartender, and I'll take advice about how to make a drink, but I'm not going to take advice about how the world should be run. It was just one more illustration of that. And Joe Rogan is promoting the dickens out of these two. Gave him an exclusive, trying to do a whole bunch of stuff. And again, I don't have anything personal against them. I just think they act like controlled opposition. They've been too wrong on the critical issues that really contest power. And that their advice tends to be terrible on a lot of these issues. But this apparently is part of the Washington mindset. They think they can get the infrastructure bill through by dramatic. It's actually going to end up only being $500 billion in new money. For all the talk of $6 trillion and all this, it's just going to be $500 billion. But Republicans are still talking about self-funding it, which is going to be risky because the way they're talking about self-funding it is a gas tax. Why are Republicans thinking about agreeing to a gas tax increase? That is idiotic. And especially in the name of, the nice thing is AOC may kill it because it doesn't have enough climate change revolution nonsense in it.
Climate change is infrastructure, Robert. Climate change.
Yes, climate. Exactly. This economics reporter for the Washington Post acted like this was obvious. I was like, pal, that's not infrastructure. One, it's based on a delusional fantasy. People want to get a good independent view on this. Watch or read Bjorn Lomborg. So this is a longtime environmentalist. I think from Norway or Denmark, one of the Nordic countries, and who, when he read a piece attacking climate change 20 years ago, thought it was so enraged by it, set out to prove it wrong, and then realized it had more truth in it than everything he'd been led to believe.
Yeah.
And so he has been the lead on all these policies are nonsense. Watch Michael Moore's own Planet of the Humans that YouTube had to ban because of how effective it was. He has pointed out all these green infrastructure deals aren't really even green. They abuse the environment more than almost anything else does. The Koch brothers, by the way, are neck deep in it. That's why the Koch brothers make money either way. They make money if you're not doing green infrastructure, or if you're doing traditional fossil fuels, or you're doing green infrastructure. But this is why Putin he loves the green stuff because the way green policies work in the U.S. is to help Russian oil and energy sector.
That's exactly
because of how it works. That's why he's like, yes, you're right. Yes. Keep working on what you're doing. Take away your own oil supplies. Good idea.
And that meeting last week, Robert, we didn't even get it. Well, what the odds would have been before any of that anyway? But oh my God, how bad?
Yeah, well, to maybe Biden's people's credit, I don't know. I mean, if they're serious about getting out of the Middle East, I'm all for it. They're serious about getting out of Afghanistan, whatever their reasons. I don't care if they're dumb or smart. If we're finally going to get out of there, God bless.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll cheer for them too.
What's behind the scenes is Russia, while it was part of the Soviet Union, had such a long history of lying about its weapon systems. And we have such bad analysts in the United States who have such jaundiced, unrealistic views of who Putin is.
Yeah.
Putin's just Russia's Trump. Like him or dislike him, that's basically what he is. He's going to defend Russia the way Trump defends America. But if you understand that, then you can predict Putin, you can understand Putin, etc. The only difference is Putin squelched deep state power in Russia, whereas Trump got whipped by it here in the United States. But that's because Putin had a lot longer ties to people that he could make that happen. But other than that, basically the same. But because of that mindset, we assume that they could not make certain weapon systems, that now it's clear that those systems are online. It leaked in March that these systems actually had been fully designed. I mean, things like nuclear-powered drone submarines that can create a tsunami that could put half of the United States underwater. Now, there's probably some people, it reminds me of Barry Goldwater's campaign, 1964. Maybe some people look at that and think, there's large parts of that, no problem. I mean, LBJ once did a great, all the great original political campaign ads. Yeah. 1964. He was saying, here's what Barry Goldwater would like to do to the United States, and has him sawing off the western part of the United States. But I think a lot of people look at that right now and think maybe Barry had the right idea.
The kid in the nuke did Goldwater in. A lot of people don't realize that Goldwater was ahead in a lot of the polls, the private campaign polling.
LBJ was not a well-liked individual.
Yeah.
He rode Kennedy's death to his election, that and a very effective, brilliant campaign against Goldwater. And Goldwater probably stepped in it more than a few places.
He did.
And, one of his great mistakes, it's a mistake a lot of that we talked about in the show a few weeks ago, is, you get anywhere near in bed with neo-fascists, you'll get killed. Barry Goldwater danced around with some Klansman types in the 1960 South, 1964 Dixie. That killed him. As soon as he did that, that killed him. There were a lot of people who would have been open to his ideas against LBJ in particular, but not when he said he was on the side of the Dixiecrats.
Yeah, because there were some Democrats who could have jumped ship from LBJ. They didn't want that representation.
The Midwest, working class North.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's why they abandoned him so fast in 1966 and again in 1968.
Yeah.
And so, frankly, Pat, a lot of people ask me about Pat Buchanan, and I like Pat. Pat wrote nice stuff to me years ago, but Pat's big mistake was getting in bed with some of those same people. So it was real easy, and he wrote some books he didn't need to write. Even if you think, Pat, that we shouldn't have gone into World War II and Hitler wasn't all bad, maybe you keep that to yourself, Pat. I get
some arguments aren't worth it, buddy.
Yeah, he was a German Catholic isolationist from the time he was born, and the only thing that shifted was the Cold War made him a Cold Warrior. And then once the Cold War was gone, he was going to shift back to that. But he danced around with a lot of that crowd, and that made it real easy for the media to kill him. That's why he went nowhere. That's why he had a hard ceiling he couldn't get above, was because he made – and if you know Buchanan, he doesn't have any anti-Semitic bones in his body. He's not a neo-fascist, not a racist at all. He was there in 1964 in the March on Washington with Dr. King. So, that's who he is. But he thought it was okay politically to associate with some of these people, these friends of my friends nonsense that I still hear about from people. No, they're not. These people will kill you quicker than anybody, just by disease by association. But but I think that the what's really behind the scenes in all likelihood is that it appears Putin has designed both hypersonic systems and underwater systems that basically could take out half the United States overnight without us being able to do much about it. Not that that's ever his intention, but it's not good that Russia has that power in the first. These were technologies that were not supposed to be possible. Yeah. And the military establishment in the U.S. convinced itself, that's just Putin bragging.
Yeah.
No, it turned out it wasn't. And that may be the story behind the story as to what was happening. And was it a coincidence a day after? Imagine if Trump had done what Putin did. I mean, what Biden did.
With Ukraine?
A day after the meeting. And by the way, nobody deserves to get thrown under the bus more than Zelensky does. That nitwit threw Trump under the bus in early 2019 when he could have stepped up to the plate to make that impeachment go away.
Absolutely.
So, I have no respect for the guy, and I like nothing better than the fact he's got to get smacked around for his idiocy. I mean, imagine thinking you're going to go to bed with a Biden and not wake up with an STD. And that's what's happened to
now
Zelensky.
Look at you. Now look at you, Vladimir. Now look at you.
Yeah, exactly. They are going to totally throw Ukraine under the bus. I mean, the day later, he cancels $100 million. They pretend they didn't. They put out a press. No, we didn't really do that.
That's ridiculous.
Yes, they did.
Jen Psaki.
Politico's not reporting it because they didn't do it.
Jen Psaki, that's completely ridiculous, she says at the podium. Get out of here. Oh, and I'll tell you what, though. I mean, the one reporter, what's her name? God bless her. She had the audacity to ask Joe Biden a real question at that summit. You said he was a murderer. I mean, I'm just saying, you said a couple months ago he was a murderer. Did you bring up any of this? I don't understand how this could be your promise of standing up to Vladimir Putin.
Him sticking with that neoliberal script was never going to last because Biden was never going to be Mr. Tough Guy. He never was Mr. Tough Guy. I mean, when Putin sat down with NBC,
ridiculous.
And NBC, one of NBC's top national security reporters, Ken Delanian, is a longtime CIA spook. So it's not a coincidence Putin chose that network to do the interview with. But he's sitting there, and the person's asking him, did Biden say that to you? And he's like, I don't have any. He goes, I don't have any memory of that. But he goes, I'm sure Biden has a better memory than me.
Yeah, that was epic.
The trolling was just brutal. That was embarrassing.
That,
I mean, whether you're pro-Putin, anti-Putin, neutral on Putin, Biden just got smacked around, and it was driving the press insane because they thought there were going to be this big moment where Joe Biden stuck it to Vladimir Putin. And of course, they turned out totally wrong.
Could you imagine if Donald Trump attacked a female reporter the way Joe Biden attacked her for asking a serious question? What I
They
don't
just
think
can't keep the poor boy on a leash. It's
They
like where
can't-
they went, as soon as his dog found out about the Clintons, all of a sudden the dog died the next day. So it was the same sort of Biden thing. I mean, they were trying to keep him on that leash, and they just couldn't keep him on the leash. Jeff Dunham has a funny YouTube version of the press conference.
I got
Where,
check
he
that
has
out.
Biden going off saying, well, they're supposed to keep me on a leash. What am I doing up here?
Robert, who's he talking about? I'm going to be in trouble. When is a reporter going to ask him? Some reporter going to ask him, who, Joe? You're the president of the United States. Who are you going to get in trouble with, Joe?
Yeah, exactly. Well, my other favorite part was he was like, man, I sat down and talked to him for like 2 hours. Have you ever heard of somebody sitting down and talking to somebody for more than 2 hours?
I mean,
I'm like, yeah, that's the history of summits from the
That's
beginning
what
of
you do.
man. I was
Right.
like, well, where's this guy been? I mean, it's pitiful. And it's clear the whole European trip did not work out the way the Biden people thought it would.
No, how many
aside
times
from just
Syria-
praising Europe.
Syria
And we have these polls.
and Lebanon. He kept missing. Like, he didn't know which one was which. Three
Oh,
times.
yeah, completely kept
Three
flipping around
times.
Syria and Libya.
Libya.
Kept,
Libya.
And then he got he's trying to unravel Brexit by trying to force them to stay in the European Union. So he's just antagonizing the British at the wrong time while abandoning Ukraine, which has been a British obsession. And he got better support out of Brussels, but who cares?
Who
I
cares?
mean, actually putting out published polls saying, look at how much more the French and the Germans love America now, like Biden now. So what? That
Who
shouldn't be
gives a
American
damn?
president's goal.
That's a bad thing, Robert.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
a bad thing. If people think that they like your president more, it's a bad thing. You want your president to be disliked by other nations. That means he's looking out for your interest, not their interest. And Trump's press release was hilarious. He was just smacking Macron. He's like, their club. Macron's so happy he's got his club back. Guy can't even get 10% of the vote in his own country. He's gonna get killed. If this
Completely.
keeps up,
I mean,
if this keeps up, he's in deep trouble.
Whatever extent they were trying to get Europe to be allied against China didn't really go
Not gonna
anywhere.
happen. No.
They didn't really, sort of bowed down ultimately to what Russia wants and is backing off. Now, it's good he's backing off because trying to create World War III with Russia was idiotic.
Stupid.
That's why I think why Ted Cruz and some of these people are going back to Romney's 2012 Russia campaign. It didn't work then. It didn't work for John McCain in 2008. Why are you back on it?
It didn't work for Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Didn't work for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Even Biden actually
Failed.
played it down during the 2020 campaign, in his basement campaign. So the idea that this is it's amazing that all these people going, well, I'll be even tougher on Russia. That nobody cares. The Cold War is over. Quit figuring out stupid ways to wage wars in stupid places. Ted Cruz just reminded everybody why he got whipped by Trump the first time.
Yep.
And it's why he's got no presidential future, is that kind of bad political instincts.
And this is where Americans are anyway, Robert. Here is biggest threat, enemy to the U.S. I don't know if I showed you this yet, but it's China by 20 points.
Yes.
I mean,
And look at Republicans.
I know!
Republicans are more concerned with North Korea, quite rationally, than they are Russia.
That's
Less
right.
than 10% care at all about Russia. So I mean, why in the world would you be? Notice DeSantis, who is clearly has good political advisors. He's talking about doing stuff with the border. He's talking about doing stuff vis-a-vis China. He didn't say anything about Russia, and that's because he's not an idiot. He understands that nobody cares anymore. Ted Cruz is still the number of Republicans living in 2012 is incredible.
yeah.
It's like they're still back with Dimwit from Fox. What was that guy? I'm blanking the old political advisor for W.
Rove?
Yeah, it's like Rove, who's still looking at the map saying, no, that can't be right. No, that can't be right. Ohio's definitely going
Ohio's
for
not
Romney.
over.
Remember how long he sat there denying
What
that on
an
election night?
embarrassment. What a I can't believe. Now, they did toss him for a little bit after that. But the Dick Morrises and the Tom Barones, but frankly, smarter than Karl Rove, they got tossed to the side. They were excommunicated after that. But Rove He was dumped for a little bit, then they brought him back. Why? Because they're Bushies over there. That's why. And probably W had somebody from his camp call and say, "Come on now, let Carl back on. Come on now." Yeah, and exactly. They did. That's what happened. You know, it's a good place to go to Peru, though. It is. You want to talk about this map?
Yeah.
Two.
So,
we got by region and by province.
And this, too, is being misunderstood. Latin America, the news narratives will be Latin America, quote unquote, moving left. But it's more accurate to say Latin America moving populist. Now, populism in Latin America has a leftist hue on economic policies, particularly redistribution of wealth from natural resources. But what this election was really about, for example, so you have Castillo and Fujimori. Fujimori is the daughter of the longtime dictator, who I think is still in prison. So, but was given credit for defeating the Shining Path, was backed by deep state people, came out of nowhere as a Japanese economist educated in the West to suddenly run Peru. That should tell you everything you need to know. This was probably not an indigenous movement. Not long thereafter, disbanded the Congress, disbanded the courts, started whacking people. But he had the utility. All fascists benefit from socialist or communist, and all communists benefit from fascist. I mean, that's where Antifa came about. Communist rebranded as being anti-fascist. They justified each other. But The Shining Path, great movie and book, Dancer Upstairs, portrays this well. The Shining Path was a brutally vicious communist movement in Peru. And the peasants got stuck in between. They got stuck in between the death squads of Fujimori and the horrendous rule of The Shining Path. And if you understand that, you understand someone like Castillo, who's the son of illiterate peasants. And what is Lima's up in the part that's the strong part for Fujimori. All the southern part of the country, this would overlap, by the way, with where the Shining Path was strong. But what people mistake that to mean sympathy with the Shining Path. It's actually quite the opposite. These populations were badly abused by the Shining Path. And one of the things that made the counter-revolution against the Shining Path successful is these peasants were armed and allowed to fight back against the Shining Path. But they are all very deeply populist. So take Castillo, who's being described as he barely won. They haven't certified it yet because they're trying to do a Fulton County style election count down there in Peru.
I was just gonna say we can all agree on how this is going. I mean,
yes. Exactly. And Castillo pretty consistently led, but only by a small margin. But what is the southern part? If you look at, also there's a class difference here. The orange north is very upper, is where the upper middle class and upper class live. So if you went by economics and precinct, Fujimori wins by 60, 70, 80 points in the upper class precincts. Castillo in the working class rural areas wins by 30, 40, or 50 points. So it's a class driven. But to give you an idea for Castillo, he's opposed to gay marriage. He's opposed to abortion. His family are charismatic evangelicals. So, when people say he's left, it's like, what do you mean by left? He says he's very opposed to Venezuelan immigration, says they're just a bunch of criminals and need to be kicked out of the country. So it says he's not a Chavista or Maduro because of how they've become attached to Chavez. This book behind me is really good. Chavez was much more of a left populist than he was. He called himself a socialist, but it was Maduro who really put in socialism in Venezuela. Mostly, like my view of socialism is what's the public share of the economy?
Yeah.
So the government share of the economy didn't change under Chavez. It did under Maduro. Yeah. Same with the currencies, especially. Chavez talked a big game, but mostly what Chavez did was take money from the oil companies and give it to poor people. Give it to poor people. So it's redistributionist, but it's not statist. And Castillo comes from a redistributionist of natural resources, but not a statist perspective. So, like, he's for big foreign corporations keeping more of the resources and the wealth from those resources inside the country. He comes from one of those dark red areas where one of the world's richest gold mines is, but it's one of the poorest regions in the world. So it's that conflict that drives left populism in Latin America. And often you're forced to choose the choice from 1950 to 2000, but definitely 1990 in Latin America was fascist or communist. Unfortunately, and we've sort of helped force feed that dichotomy by associating corporatism with Americanism and associating peasant movements with communism when historically they don't need to be aligned that way at all. But what Castillo is mostly a left populist. It looks like he will be the new president. Now, it won't matter a lot because the Congress is all divvied up in Peru. And Castillo's not really, like I said, he's more of a mixed economy guy. In other words, what he wants is less dependence on food imports and more, and he himself is a farmer.
Yeah, that's why I have something to add here real quick. This is a cautionary tale, Robert, to Republicans and non-statists everywhere. Because if you don't give people a populist alternative on what is thought to be more traditional right, then it will manifest on the left and you will lose to it. And it's like, you're just saying, when it comes to some of these issues that the American right now cares about in a post, during Trump and a post-Trump, era, he actually is right on overlap with that. I mean, completely. It's a nationalism, national populist kind of fervor. Now, It just means domestically on some of these other issues, he's going to lean to the left on something you probably and I would not support. Maybe, though. I don't know. We'll see,
Yeah,
we'll see.
It's mostly like it's pro-small farmer, pro-small business. Yeah. It's very nationalistic. It doesn't want foreign companies or foreigners, either foreign immigration hurting them or foreign corporations.
It's like the original Republican Party. That's
exactly.
I mean,
exactly. Well, anti-corruption and very socially conservative and traditional. And so it shows because it's the misreading of this by parts of the left too, don't understand this is why the Hispanic why Trump's strategy of populism was a brilliant strategy for Hispanic votes in the United States.
He
not only be anti-communist, because the other thing they don't understand is the reason why this guy is not anywhere near Marxist is because the antipathy towards the Shining Path is intense in that same region where he's strong. These are people who had family members killed by Shining Path. Yeah. Brutal, just vicious Marxist campaign. Now, some were also victimized by the death groups that were set up by Fujimori's father. So that the fact that, but Fujimori has strength because of the perception of economic security, stability. But it's not enough even in Peru to win against a completely unknown guy 4 years ago, a small school, a teacher. Yeah. But to give you an idea for Castillo, what ticked him off that led to some of the teacher strikes was not being able to teach during the lockdown.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy he is.
It was unfair, unjust. So that's where this gives also a map, as you note, for Republican politics in the U.S. There is major inroads with the Latino vote. Oh. There was a major Latino district that flipped its mayor's race, I think, last week or the week before in Texas. This is the future of the Republican Party.
It's the only future. It's the only one. Yeah.
All the Democrats assumed that more Latinos mean more Democratic votes. The problem is they've always underestimated the populism of these groups. They're anti-statist. They're skeptical of communism. They're socially and morally conservative. And if you put forth a populist agenda, like your breakdown of Nevada was very good. If they see republicanism as George W. Bush, I'm going to lose my job and my house and my dream republicanism, it has no chance. If, on the other hand, as Trump has resurged in Nevada, a state that should have been lost to him, went from a +7 state, supposed to be double digits. According to John Ralston 2 years ago, it was going to be double digits.
It was going to be. Yeah, it was already.
Yes. And instead, they needed by literally every hook and by every crook to hold on to win it this past election cycle. Trump exposed the same thing we're seeing in Peru, which is populism is very popular with the Latino votes. So if we keep, this is a group that has no interest in critical race theory, has no interest in men participating in, this is a culture that's big machismo. In fact, that Peruvian president has been criticized because he has very traditional gender notions. He isn't going to be pushing any new, tranny Olympian for the Peruvian Olympic competition anytime soon. So this is a group that is the biggest, richest vein of support. And the Romney types that said, be pro-immigration and that will make them like you, were always wrong. Many of these voters are conservative on immigration, just like Castillo is in Peru.
Look how it turned out even with the Mexican president. This was going to be somebody, Donald Trump was going to be his arch nemesis, and they were going to hate each other. He's left-wing, and he stands for everything Trump doesn't stand for. He can't stand Joe Biden. Can we just say the truth here? He can't stand Joe Biden. He wants Donald Trump back. He feels like his country is being rolled by Joe Biden's policies. They're worried about labor utilization. They're worried about being trampled by all the caravans on the way through. This is not at all the Rove Romney mentality. The 2012 autopsy was the most expensive piece of political trash I have ever seen in my life. That was never the way forward. Their fundamental assumption, by the way, was wrong, which is that there were more Hispanic voters were the reason Barack Obama got elected. That was the premise they started with, and it was wrong.
False from the get-go.
Yes. As a share of the electorate, they fell. Barack Obama was reelected. Yeah, there was like 2 million more, but that's because the electorate was bigger. I mean, it's simple. I mean, their electorate was bigger, but as a share, they fell. Whites went down, blacks went up, and they fell as a percentage of the electorate. So their basic premise, their starting point was incorrect. And these people, when we poll them, they are no less likely to tell you that they are opposed to immigration than most of the white faction in these states. It is so wrong. It's just completely wrong. And
They're naturally populist voters.
They really
think and talk like Trump.
They really
Whether
are.
you look at the left or the right version of populism in Latin America,
It's
they
ruffian.
often look like Trump does.
It's ruffian,
They often
yeah.
talk like Bolsonaro. Often talks like Trump.
Yeah,
I mean,
great
tough
example.
guys, macho guy. This Castillo guy really kind of talks like Trump. You just people could look up his definition of gender roles, and it sounds like a Trump speech, but even more conservative. So that's who the populations coming in the United States are coming from. These groups where populist politics is very popular, and it's why Trump was deeply I saw a bunch of stuff this past weekend for whatever reason that I think was a fake narrative that Trump was mad about. Trying to reach out to African American voters, Latino voters. One, there's no chance that Trump's mad about that.
No,
none whatsoever.
No way.
Number two, it paid off. He actually made major inroads with African American men, and then massive inroads with Latino voters.
Yep.
It's the number one reason why Florida wasn't competitive and Texas wasn't competitive.
Yep.
Was the massive shift towards Trump, double-digit shift in many of these places towards Trump. I mean, Miami-Dade getting under 10 points. That was supposed to be unheard of.
Historic, Robert. I mean, he won the same amount of the vote that George W. Bush won in his big win in 2004 because everybody thought that, because of what happened with Gore v. Bush, that Florida would be close. It wasn't close, really. Yeah. And it was Miami-Dade was a hell of a lot whiter in 2004 than it is now, my friend.
Completely.
You can't get to those numbers without big.
I mean, Trump won counties nobody even thought possible along the Texas border.
Zapata.
Why? That's because his immigration policies are popular with Mexican American and Latino voters. So the amount of it's the reason why Arizona. Democrats thought Arizona was safe. It's the reason why they had to
points.
by hook and by crook pull that one out, which I believe the audit will likely expose as being the case. It turns out they can't even find ballots, apparently.
Well, Robert, this is the thing. Matt Brander ran into the same problems we ran into when we were trying to look at Arizona. First and foremost, only Maricopa had data. That was it, available at that time. No one else was giving their data. It was like Apache County was a real target for us. They weren't doing anything, man. I mean, they were not giving... Forget precinct level data. Forget that. We just need the actual history for the damn county, And it was interesting. They're auditing Maricopa when they actually complied more with everybody else. I tell people this all the time. I don't know what Maricopa's going to show. They've been very tight-lipped, but Robert's right. The slips don't add up. They're not adding up. And the bottom line is, if you think Maricopa was bad, why aren't these others? Why aren't these others being as forthcoming with this information, right? And Apache, God knows if what happened in Maricopa is bad. Well, what the hell happened in Apache County then? I mean that. Look, I'm not targeting it because it's a blue area. I'm telling you because it was like totally either incoherent or incompetent, and maybe both, or very, very secretive. And, so that combination just raises my BS meter. We have never had an election like this where whole counties just said, I'm sorry, you can't have that information. We don't really even have it yet. What the hell are you talking about?
Colorado
certify a
is
vote?
passing a law to ban election audits?
Yes, to ban audits.
I mean, it just exposes how scared these people are for the world to find out how elections are going. It's the reason why they're making such a big push to get rid of the filibuster and put pressure on Manchin, he's never going to fold in my view. The guy thinks he's president right now. He thinks and he's always wanted to be president, that kind of thing. Plus, he may have ambitions to return to the governor's chair in West Virginia.
That's what I hear too. Yeah.
But so you have the combination of those factors. But it's because it's like, why are they willing to take that gamble, knowing that if they lose the filibuster's control and Republicans get back control in the Senate, where they have an institutional edge already, because of the where the senators come from? Why are they willing to take that gamble? It's because they believe their only chance to hold power is to kill the filibuster and push through these election reforms so that they can continue to hold power in future elections. Well, it tells you how much they think the election rule changes in 2020 matter. Well, so if they didn't think they mattered, they wouldn't be doing this.
Juan Williams said the Democrats won't win. If we get election integrity, they won't win. He flatly said it, and he characterized it as a steal. Okay, we would be stealing elections if we allow these reforms to go through. What are you talking about, Juan? People are simply asking for elections to be conducted generally the way they were conducted before, and now that's stealing an election. They can use that terminology all you want. You question the result when they're the winners, and you are banned from every platform known to man. And I just when it comes to our what's it called, our buddy Sean Trendy, he's got an article today on Real Clear Politics about whether or not it is really smart for Democrats to get rid of this filibuster in the end, because like you said, in the end, the institutional advantage that Republicans could have could really come back to bite them. And
there was
we've seen this
bunch
before.
Of stuff Trump couldn't get through because of the filibuster.
That's right.
So, if Trump returns or Trump-ish candidate returns in 2024, different animal.
Totally.
I was going through the live chat on, I have an open live chat at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Nice.
One person recommended that they really should remake Biden's recent European trip into the European Vacation National Lampoon sequel. that would be, and Biden would be a perfect guy for that, right? Like, I mean, you could see him being Chevy Chase's character, like a dumber down Chevy Chase's character, doing the same crazy stuff, zanier stuff, but for even dumber reasons. That's somebody should make some memes on that, because that's definitely appropriate.
Yeah, that's target rich right there. That's target rich. Yeah, what else they got? Go through it. If anybody's got any questions, go ahead and ask them. I unfortunately don't have Laura here manning the chat, so just to apologize to our locals. I didn't have Laura manning the chat today, so normally we would field those questions or, have people come on in. But I would say, too, speaking of Joe Manchin, real quick, I mean, the DNC chair gets on TV, gets on NBC the other day, and calls him a racist. Yeah. I mean, this is crazy, Robert.
Ridiculous, because they're just accelerating because they can't understand. Now, and by the way, another component on this, going to your polling results, is that if they're going to take out Biden and replace him with Harris, beyond the sort of what's already happening, the first early indicators will be polls admitting his weakness, and we did start to see that last week, where people, basically, in other words, the real reason why Biden is still there is because Kamala Harris is hated.
She's falling like a rock.
Exactly. So if Biden is no longer popular, it's the only thing that's salvaging him. So if he's no longer over 50% on core issues, they're like, well, we might as well have Harris in, who's running our agenda, because Biden's not popular anyway. So that doesn't give us any advantage. Well, last week you started seeing that discussion because of something you've been tracking. Well, they're now publicly admitting, which is that he also has an intensity gap problem.
Big time.
That liberals and low turnout constituency groups are the biggest group to watch for midterm off-year elections, because it's often a turnout battle, assuming 2020 isn't repeated, where they substituted for turnout battle by just swamping the system with ballots. A vote for you, a vote for me. It was Oprah giving out cars, was giving out ballots last election.
That's like an Ellen show or something.
Exactly. One for you, two for you, three for you. Assuming that doesn't repeat itself in 2022, then it's all a battle of turnout. And for that, what matters most is intensity, the very favorable versus very unfavorable rating. And his very favorable rating is very low, and it continues to decline.
He's the unremarkable. That's what we call him over here. He's just the unremarkable.
And especially with low turnout groups, millennials, self-described liberals, minority voters, particularly Latinos. He has very little enthusiasm with those groups. The people who really love him are the people who always turn out. White, liberal Democrats.
And they're going to anyway. And they're going to anyway, Robert. I mean,
correct.
That's the thing.
That's not the group. You want to monitor how much they like him amongst. The key for Trump, the reason why he was able to salvage 2018, win a bunch of Senate seats, win some close governorships that turned out to be a very big deal.
Yep.
Georgia, Florida, Ohio, in many respects that we're now seeing in public policy, election reforms that are passing solely because those states have Republican governors, Arizona, et cetera. In some of those states that would have otherwise gone Democrat, but there was amongst low propensity voters, Trump maintained a very high, very favorable rating. Biden is just the opposite. And if they start, the next thing you'll see is if you start seeing leaked stories about Hunter's problems or the FBI accelerating their investigation, that'll be a sign that they're about to kick Biden to the curb within a couple of months. So, but watch the poll results, and in particular, watch what liberal media people are saying about those poll results. Because if they're saying, "Hey, we don't like this," that's the first sign that they're going to suddenly Biden will have a health issue. You know, it's almost like Soviet style. You know, they'll send him on one of those summer vacations, and he just never comes back.
What do you
not as president, at least?
What do you make of this story? There's been rumors now for a while, and it's kind of funny because, you don't have the head of Chinese counterintelligence flip overnight, and some things that I know John Ratcliffe said now is starting to come back to me from conversations I had with other people. And you know this because I told you about this, but the audience may not. John Ratcliffe was asked to serve on the president's second impeachment defense team. He declined. And when he did, apparently, Jared Kushner was like, he's abandoning the president in his time of need. And, Ratcliffe just lost his what and was just, how dare you? How dare you? I backed him from the jump. It was you who convinced your father-in-law not to tell the American people how bad the China stuff is on Joe Biden. And
a little caveat there. People are wondering why all this UFO info is coming out. It's because Ratcliffe declassified it and ordered it to be coming out over the next 9 months.
Yep. And by the way, excellent. I mean, we had a lot of interest. We took that poll question out this time. Those 4, actually. But I would like to ask it at least, once or twice a year. Maybe again, we'll do it again quarterly because I do know there are a lot of things coming. And I'd like to keep it, and got massive media attention from that poll. If you were calling, Sagar, they wanted it. So I did do a Hill interview with What America Thinks. That's the name of that show. Yeah, we did that. We also did the lab leak. I mean, Robert, did you see the lab leak results? I mean, this is hilarious.
And I've been citing it to everyone. It's a sign of the breakdown of the gatekeeper system. That percentage of people. And by the way, you were asking whether there was a poll before. YouGov did do one, and a majority of Republicans recognized 6 months ago that this was the case. So when you're like the number's too high for a large number of Republicans to have not already been on top of this. They were basically what the real proxy is. How many people listen to independent media? The more you listen to independent media, non-institutional media, the more you already knew or had figured out that this was a man-made, lab-sourced virus. The more you listen to institutional media, the less you knew about it. That's the crowd that's making the Jon Stewart conversion to the reality. But the fact that the mainstream media, the gatekeeper institutional control of big government, big tech, and big media could not keep people from knowing this story this early. I mean, this is like people who had an alternative view of JFK's assassination. They didn't think that until 8 years.
If you saw that chart I just put up there, I mean, look at the difference between parties still. I mean, independents and Republicans, they're like, of course.
The big key is Republicans don't rely on the institutional media.
They don't. They
don't rely on big tech. They don't. I mean, the reason why they're often ahead of the curve is not just partisan. It's because they understand the institutional press is unreliable.
Yep. That's 100%. I mean, we see that in a lot of these, these polling results. So if there's something that comes up like a story like this, Republicans are always really quick to be skeptical, independents are really quick to tell you, you know what, I don't really know. It's not uncommon for them to be unsure more than anything about partisans. They don't look at it as much. But I'm just going to show it one more time. The fourth row down, guys, is very unlikely. Look at Republicans and independents, and then look at Democrats. I mean, here you have Democrats are the only ones who are still in double digits to say very unlikely, 11.2%. Somewhat unlikely is 12.3. Everybody else is in single digits. That is, like Robert said, I think he's right on the money. It's not only because of the Trump effect and Donald Trump said it, it's because of the source of information that they are reviewing, whether they're reading or watching television, the sources of their information. And also, they trust those sources. So until those people come around and the Washington or the Wall Street Journal publishes a report, and then everybody has no choice but to cite and talk about the report with the Wall Street Journal. That was also one of the biggest, it was like how that was reported was a fraud in and of itself. Everybody knew about this intelligence for months. The Trump administration, it started at the State Department, Ratcliffe's agency as well. They already knew the Chinese were attempting to engineer different variants to make it look like it was natural and evolved. They would have told you if you would have listened. They were trying to tell whoever would listen. But folks, if you look at how these media outlets operate, who did Washington Post smear today? What's his name on critical race theory?
Christopher Rufo.
Yeah, and Rufo. And here he has all the emails to back it up. He specifically said this.
Anybody that knows anything about academics knows critical theory has been applied in 20 different contexts for 50 years.
They pretend
this is not. They're pretending that they're like, what? But first they thought it would be popular. Then they discover it's not popular as parents all across the country are like, I want nothing to do with this. And so then they say, oh, it doesn't really exist. You guys are making this up. There's no such thing as critical. How dumb are these people?
There's no such thing as critical race theory. It's a white
It's because
conspiracy.
It's really unpopular, so they're going to pretend it doesn't exist instead.
Yeah, it is. I put this up here, and some people had a problem with the color pattern. Guys, the color is the degree to which that group opposes. It's not supposed to be by party. This is by race. And the deeper the red, the more the opposition. So lightest is
everybody opposes.
Everybody
There's
opposes.
Nobody who supports this.
It's just under 50. If it's under 55%, then it's a light shade of red. 55 to 66, I think, is that middle. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to see right now. But the deeper the opposition, the deeper the red becomes. Even if black voters alone, without whites, Asians, Hispanics, or any other racial group, if only the referendum was allowed to be voted upon by blacks and African Americans, critical race theory would still go down. That's incredible. Because you know what it is? Scott Adams said this, and he's got like this little thing with the Columbia Bugle on Twitter right now. Truth is, they're both making good points. The Columbia Bugle is right that you're never going to convince the leftist academic that it's wrong or not, and to oppose it. That's true. But Scott is right about, in a way, on how to sell this to most, or not most, but how to sell this to certain people that you may not, the media may lie to them, persuade with lies. You don't teach your kids they're born losers. That's it.
Yeah, the only way critical race theory develops any degree of support is if the right allows the racist to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because it's the racists pushing like fake narratives about Tulsa, fake narratives about a wide range of things. They're the ones who are and some are well-meaning. Brandon Tatum, well-meaning, but he stepped in the trap. No, yes, what happened in Tulsa was horrendous. The fake story that, oh, really, it was people pretending that because BLM makes up stories today means that no bad racism ever happened in America is not a smart step to take, folks. That then you're discrediting yourself and every cause you're associated with. And so the only way critical race theory will get some degree of support or sympathy is if people go lap onto the alt-right. The other group that continues to make a mistake is this constant mythology that was initiated by the alt-right, but now is pushed by a lot of quote-unquote populists, but who aren't, who think that Trump made a mistake by reaching out to brown and black voters.
Yeah, I've heard this
That's
too.
just moronic insights, bad insights. The whole history of populism has been biracial at some level. Trump made extraordinary inroads in the African-American vote, and the best ever inroads in terms of year to year from 2012 to 2020 improvement amongst Latino voters, who are an increasingly important constituency in increasingly important states. And what he recognized was that populism was the path to their appeal, not Romney-style snobbish pro-immigration or like the post-Romney analysis suggested.
Yeah.
And so people who are taking the bait and saying, no, we should just double down on getting. The other mistake they're making is they really think that appealing to African-American Latino vote, this is a myth that's been going on all the way back to Buchanan's era. There's a bunch of people in the so-called populist right who aren't really in there, who really believe all these racist myths. Rothbard, who was a libertarian, believed all these ridiculous racist myths. And the idea is that racism is popular down deep. So that there's really a trade-off between working class white support and African-American Latino support. No, there isn't. That's what Trump proved.
Yeah, I disagree.
And these fake analyses that's relying on bad exit poll data and selective exit poll data to say Trump did worse amongst working class whites. No, he didn't. He got 20 to 25% more votes in working class white precincts than he did in 2016. The reason why he ran into trouble was not disproportionate to working class white areas. It was in general wherever there was a surge of mail-in voting that did not have a class coloration to the. And if he went down anywhere, it was upper middle class communities. So the only thing that failed, if to the degree it failed, was any effort to focus or obsess or worry about suburbs was a mistake.
Yep.
To try to appease upper middle class voters at the expense of working class voters of whatever race was if you want to call anything a mistake, that was because he was never going to win that particular suburban upscale voter, and wasting time on it was just that, was wasting time on it. Double down on war, double down on opposition to war, double down on opposition to bad economic policies, on war and trade. What we said he should have been hammering from his convention speech,
Joe
he should have been repeating throughout the campaign. He didn't even mention it once
Joe Biden
in either debate.
To send your jobs to China and your children to Iraq.
And that's an issue that appeals to white working class, Latino working class, African-American working class, citizen, immigrant, doesn't matter who it is. They're all against, in the working class, those dumb wars, and they're all against, the reachable voter is, and they're all against, the persuadable voter, against having their job shipped away. And that was the mistake, was not doubling down on that. These people taking the bait of saying, hey, we should argue for basically more racist policies, don't realize that they're acting in a self-discrediting way.
What does that mean, Robert? So just focus on the white work, because I totally disagree with that.
And that's what they say. It's like,
what does that mean?
The working class concerns are working class across the board.
Exactly.
They're not unique to white people. They're not. And I still don't even get the idea of white as a race. I mean, it wasn't 100 years ago. It was Anglo-Saxon. I mean, it just keeps changing. These racist ideologues can't even stay on the same racism pitch.
And Robert, they're growing. They're growing. Working class Hispanics are growing. Huge.
Trump won a county named after a Mexican revolutionary on the border. Well, I mean, people pretending that that's why Texas did well, because he got hammered in the Dallas-Fort Worth suburbs.
The Anglo who used to vote Republican 2-1 in the Dallas suburbs. That doesn't happen anymore, and it's not going to happen unless Democrats cause an epic catastrophe, because they have a tend to abandon.
That was another debate last week. Good transition. These idiots claiming that the Republican Party is better off without Trump. That's back again, because they're looking at a couple of Georgia races, and they're saying Trump probably hurt the Republicans in Georgia. They even said that Trump hurt turnout in Georgia. Like, where do these people come from?
The place he visited was the only place that didn't suffer from turnout issues. Yes. He could have went around to some of the other more... And we've talked about this before.
They asked him not to come, by the way.
Yeah, and
the Republicans, the party running it, refused.
Until the very last day.
They were the ones who pushed Trump out. And what they don't understand, and maybe it's a good point you can hammer away at based on the polling, These suburban upscale voters who are shifting Democratic are not just shifting Democratic because they don't like Trump. They're shifting Democratic because they're anti-populist at heart.
That's right.
And they're aligned with the Democratic Party, this new generation of young upscale suburbanites, and appealing to them is a waste of time.
And David Perdue, for all of you out there, you Jonah Goldbergs, the rest of you, David Perdue underperformed Donald Trump in the Atlanta suburbs, the Atlanta metro area. So I don't know where they come up with these numbers. Look, as the only poll who got it right, because I am, the only poll who got the runoffs right, they lost themselves. Democrats didn't win that race. Republicans, either one of them. Republicans lost them. And the very this is how you know they're so full of crap. The very last day before the election, they start to panic. And they're like, maybe we should have had Trump back here. Maybe we should have. So they start calling the president. Will you come back and gin up turnout in the South and in the central part of the state, which is obviously where there were problems. Now even Guy Benson's like, you know what? Republican turnout did suffer in these areas. That's a turnout area where Brian Kemp and Mitt Romney and everybody else couldn't do that very well. Donald Trump squeezed a lot of votes out of those areas. And if he would have went there, he would have helped them by telling people, don't listen to Linwood, go out and vote. Right?
If they would have made the recount the runoff, they would have won.
We told them
I
how
was
to win,
in the
Robert.
room
We told
and
them
gave
how to
them that advice just a few days. I was there with Sonny Perdue and the whole group, Doug Collins and all of them. And we laid out, me and other people there laid out, true Trump loyalists, laid out, make the runoff. And in fact, we even talked about it about a month later, back in December before the runoff. Make the runoff. Make the recount the runoff. Say that you're going to vote for January 6th for election integrity review, and not certify the presidential election vote until that review has been done, and you will get the massive Trump turnout. And they refused. And for folks out there, the other reason they lost is because they're corrupt.
Yeah,
both of them are corrupt. The Perdue family's been corrupt for 20 years.
Right.
And both of them did massive insider trading and refused to stop doing it. Yeah. I mean, that's where they got almost every other radio ad that Warnock was running and that Ossoff was running was about how their opponent did insider trading refused to stop doing it. I mean,
it's damaging when it's true.
If they would have just done that one thing, they would have won.
It's damaging when
Trump
it's true.
Trump is the salvation of the Republican Party. Being opposed to Trump is the death of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, they're that very last day, they're in a panic, which is how you know they're full of crap, because they did realize they made the wrong strategy call, because at the very 24 hours, I'm telling you, 24 hours before Election Day, I get a call from a Trump loyalist saying they now have again reached out to the president. Let me ask you a question based on your polling. Would you tell the president to go or not? And I said, these races are lost. If you send the president there, all he does is risk his own credibility. That's it. Because then they're going to blame you when you lose anyway. But if you go back down there, they're really going to blame you. And they're going to say, see, he came down and still didn't help. I said, no, salvage his credibility with the voters and don't go. And 24 hours, they're on the phone begging, trying to get Rudy, trying to get Steve to call the president and say, come down here, we need you. And I straight told him, don't you do it. Tell them to go off, all right? And that's it, because they've been hammering you and then, of course, 24 hours before, what did both of them do? Yes, that's right, I will support in the Senate the objecting to the Electoral College vote in Georgia. Oh, please. You can't do that. You can't play games with people like that, Robert. They're not dumb. They know, But it's
what they don't understand is the 2012 coalition that lost anyway at a presidential level.
Worse.
But it is dead. It is gone. It is not coming back. And pretending that they're this delusional state that they think it's right around the corner, that the upper middle class young people, my daughter's in that generation, nieces are in that generation.
Yeah,
I'll give an example of my young relatives. The ones that are college educated and upscale, they're all Democratic. There's none of them that are Republican. By contrast, I have nieces and nephews that are half Mexican. They're all trending towards Republicanism, towards Trump. So it was right there in my own family. I could witness it. And that's the future. Trump blazed out the future. The only thing, that's why they had to do what they did. That's why they had to fortify the election in the way they did, because Trump got more votes than any incumbent or president in history.
It would have lost.
So they had to gin up what they got for the other fellow. But Trump gave the path. I mean, well, what about 75 million voters? Do you have to second guess?
I know.
That is the path. And so just follow Trumpish populism. Now, you could probably drop some of Trump's excesses. You don't have to have all of Trump necessarily. But you do need to it needs to be Trumpish populism if you're going to move forward.
But it's
if the
the
Republican
message,
Party
not
has
the man.
any future, that's it.
It's the message, not the man. I mean, I would at least suggest, keeping masculinity as a, if you're a male candidate. Absolutely. But it doesn't have to have the crassness that comes with it, Robert, right?
You don't have to be New York.
And what you said, they're going to find out the hard way when this census comes out, because those neighborhoods they keep talking about in Berks County and Montgomery and everywhere else in southeastern Philadelphia, they don't look the same way they looked when Mitt Romney was on the ticket. And get this, by the way, I'll say this real quick before we wrap it up. From 2019 to 2020 alone, Robert, Milwaukee lost 0.3 of a percentage point in population. Philadelphia, 4. Detroit, 8. And yet all of them posted big, ridiculous increases. Wait, folks, until you see the 2010 to 2019 numbers. And then you're going to really be scratching your freaking heads. Because I only know because I'm looking at the voter file every year. And I'm like, wait a minute, these places are depressed. Economically depressed population, scurrying out of there as fast as you can, which is another reason why the suburbs are getting, are trending the way they're trending, because these people are leaving the disaster that they created in the inner cities, and we now know that from housing data. That's not even speculation anymore, anecdotal. So, I mean, they have a rude awakening, Robert. I mean, that the 2012 electorate is over, and in 2012, they still thought it was 1980. I mean, these people don't know how to move, man. They don't. No. Well, tell everybody where they could find you, Robert. It's 410. I know probably we both got some stuff we got to go do. Tell everybody where they can find you, where to follow you, where to join.
Sure. The main place to come is at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. There's exclusive content. There's hush-hush episodes that get into alternative theories of events that might have predicted what really happened on January 6th long before it started to become public, might have predicted what was really happening with the COVID lab long before it became lab leak or lab source before it became public. But 90% of the information is free, so it's just a community you get to watch the interaction with. If you want to engage, be part of it, get the exclusive stuff, it costs all of $5 a month. So so join vivabarneslaw.locals.com, and that's where you can find me. In fact, I'll be there for the after party in just a little bit.
It's good stuff. All right, folks, and it is a great channel. I got to tell you, it really is. Sunday was a great show, by the way. Robert, I was shocked that you came on. It was Father's Day. I'm like, oh, you know what? They are doing something. All right, I'm going to check this out. And a lot of it is free, guys. You'll love it, but, I mean, it's $5. And the same thing with the People's Pundit community. You want to learn to build survey questionnaires, get voter analysis. We've been holding Zoom meetings. They've been cool. You can see it scrolling. Both are scrolling on the bottom now. But, yeah, next episode, don't miss it next week. Unless something barring anything that happens, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, Robert, we're going to kick rocks over here. All the best, my friend. Thanks for joining. All right, folks, that's it. That's Robert Barnes. Don't forget to follow Robert on vivabarneslaw.com. You can follow me, peoplespundit.locals.com. All the best, guys. Enjoy the Bowen Band.